The song Someone is Waiting occupies an unusual place in the legacy of the musical company. It's Bobby's only solo that seems to have never had its presence in the score in doubt, at least relative to Marry Me a Little, which was cut from the original production and added back in as the Act 1 finale decades later, or to Being Alive, which was Sondheim's umpteenth attempt at the Act 2 finale, the protagonist's climactic musical statement. But Sondheim certainly felt Someone is Waiting, which is in the middle of Act 1, was underappreciated and underperformed. Here's what he had to say about the song in his interviews with Mark Horowitz.
I remember Larry Kirk telling me when he sang a song in company called Someone is Waiting that it was the hardest song he'd ever had to sing, and he'd sung many, many difficult songs. Now, Someone is Waiting, on the surface of it, it's stepwise motion. There are very few leaps in it. I don't know why it's so hard to sing, and he couldn't tell me why either. There's something about the movement in that song, because there are no open dissonances like I've been talking about. It's a mystery.
I want to look at this song through the lens of that no open dissonances comment, and hopefully address part of this mystery. I think he's only talking about the song's opening because it blossoms into some pretty trippy clashes later on, but the song starts out in the same universe as Satie's first gymnopédie, this lullaby rocking between two chords. So that's the Satie vamp, and here's Sondheim's. And Sondheim's melody does indeed move mostly by step. Someone is waiting, cool as Sarah, easy and loving as Susan, Jenny. Now you might have noticed that in this Sondheim song, there aren't any rhymes yet. And that's going to keep happening in the next phrase, which is a melodic repetition, until a big leap at the end. Someone is waiting, warm as Susan, frantic and touching as Amy, Joanne. And if you happen to be counting measures, you might have noticed that Bobby's phrases are 10 bars long instead of a more traditional 8 or 16. And you might have also noticed that each time the phrase ends without much tension, Sondheim has drifted from the starting key of F sharp to C sharp. In music theory, these are called the tonic and the dominant, and one of the first things you learn about these chords is their relationship, that the dominant has tension and needs to return to the tonic for resolution, but there's no tension in these chords. And one reason is that Sondheim's in F sharp, but it's not quite right, or maybe not quite enough, to call it F sharp major. Instead of the major scale do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, we're getting do, re, mi, raised fa, sol, la, ti, do. We can hear it in the second chord of the vamp. So this isn't major, or it's not simply major, and it's definitely not minor. It's Lydian. We're in F sharp Lydian. And that's part of why landing on the C sharp at the end of this phrase doesn't carry its typical tension. If we're in F sharp major, hearing this chord signals a propulsion back to tonic, but in F sharp Lydian, almost by definition, it's much harder to generate that urgency. We don't hear this in the melody because Bobby only sings as low as sol and as high as mi. This might have been what Sondheim was talking about when he called this melody simple. When he leaps up on Joanne at the end, when Bobby leaps up there, he skips past the note that would clarify Lydian or major. So far then, there's no rhymes to latch onto, and each phrase is just a bit too long, and they keep drifting away from tonic without needing to return. If Bobby's trying to clarify the someone who is waiting, he's getting sidetracked. The simplicity of the melody is an obstacle. But in the next section, the lyrics take a more direct turn, and we immediately hear B natural or fa instead of B sharp, and the phrases will square up to 8 bars long, and we'll even hear some rhymes. And all of this will happen at the same time the melody goes haywire. Bobby sings, would I know her, even if I met her? Have I missed her? Did I let her go? So Bobby's now asking instead of describing, and that first question word, would, lines up with our first shift to B natural. We hear it here in the accompaniment. But this is also when the open dissonances become more apparent, like, have I missed her? And the rhymes don't line up with each other. No is in the middle of one line and go is at the end of another. And for met her and let her, it's vice versa. And with our first square 8-bar phrase, Sondheim lands here on a chord that absolutely needs to keep going. And when it does, the melody becomes honestly difficult to sing. Bobby returns to his descriptions, and they're now merging. A Susan sort of Sarah, a Jenny-ish Joanne. And now these dissonances are unignorable. Sort of Sarah, right? But now the name Joanne will lead to the first and pretty much only overt rhyme in the entire song. Sondheim keeps hammering the same dissonance in Bobby's melody as the lyrics reveal themselves in the highest register to be a plea. Wait for me, I'm ready now, I'll find you if I can. And Sondheim gives the accompaniment a few bars to float back to familiar ground. And we've landed back on C sharp, but in this section, Sondheim hasn't drifted to C sharp so much as he's tumbled through an entire cycle, more technically through the diatonic circle of fifths, before the next logical stop when the opening tune returns. Someone will hold me. And this process repeats again, almost in its entirety. The Lydian lullaby, the lack of rhymes, the drifting, the descriptions, and then the open dissonances, the hint of a rhyme scheme, the cycling through, and the questions and the pleading. But now, in the plea, Sondheim, and I don't really have a better word for this, condenses the harmonies, and he accelerates the melody and consolidates all of the names he's been singing into a single idea. So this is going from the end of the question section. We get, maybe so has she, my blue-eyed Sarah, warm Joanne, sweet Jenny, loving Susan, crazy Amy, wait for me, I'll hurry, wait for me. We get typical hallmarks of resolution. The harmony lands on F sharp, and there's a closing rhyme, but the reality is murkier. Sondheim returns to the F sharp Lydian, and Bobby's melody evaporates at the top of his range, and the rhymes are between so has she, which lands on a downbeat, and wait for me, which lands on beat 2, and hurry, which lands on beat 3. And calling these true rhymes, these E syllables, all with different stresses, is a stretch. So in this song, the closer Bobby gets to the perfect lyrical encapsulation of someone, the more harmony and phrase and rhyme and melody, even when it starts and ends with simplicity, the more they all venture off balance.